So thank you, Luis, for that reminder. Welcome everyone to the third session of the third conference in the sequence of conferences on topics of architectural criticism. We started 2 years ago with the topic on the duty and power of architectural criticism, which was published in book form a year later. And last year we continued with this series with the conference on defining architectural quality. And this year's topic is architecture as built criticism. We had 2 sessions last weekend with very promising papers. And today we continue with a series of papers given from across the world, really, from Austria, Italy, United States, and Japan, and Portugal. So we welcome 5 speakers today, and I would just like to thank the many members of the scientific committee who volunteered to act as mentors to the authors of this and previous sessions who have been very helpful in assisting the authors in their development. I think it's one of the unusual parts of the format that after the abstracts have been selected by the scientific committee, authors are invited to communicate with mentors who have an interest in that particular topic to advance the thinking and to make the writing sharper and more pertinent. So this presentation is not the final stage of these papers. The authors will have a chance to continue with that development before it's put into book form. So I'd like to say just a couple of more general things about architectural criticism in our age. We all know that in the heyday of architectural publication in the 20th century, essentially, there were plenty of journals, professional journals, journals that were interested in architecture. The number of architectural journals has diminished, and also newspapers, so far as they exist, as they are also threatened by the internet, the number of architectural critics being able to write in those journals has diminished. So architectural criticism as a profession is facing an uncertain future. At the same time, I think it's very important that the Committee of International Architectural Critic takes a proactive attitude towards the nurturing of the profession to assist future generations of architectural critics to be able to, nevertheless, independently of whether there are the traditional media outlets, to ensure that their thinking and their practice is at the best possible level. So, having said this, I would also like to thank everyone who's been helping on the organization of this conference, especially Tongji University and the Tongji Institute of Architecture, who have sponsored the keynote lecturers and who are also going to sponsor the publication, for their generosity. So, excuse me, I just have one message that I should read. Okay. We begin with a paper given by Patrizia Mello from Italy, and I will introduce Patrizia to you. I believe I have misspelled your first name, Patrizia. I apologize. I think you write it with the Z instead of a C. So
Okay.
I am very sorry that that is an error that has carried through.
I like Patricia.
But
I like Patricia. It's okay.
Patrizia is interested in theory, history, and criticism of contemporary design, subjects on which she has taught at different institutions in Italy and on an international level. Since 2019, she has taught contemporary architecture at the Department of Philosophy and Cultural Heritage at Ca' Foscari University of Venice. She's an associate professor at the National Scientific Qualification in Restoration and History of Architecture, in architectural design and in architectural design and technology. She has published numerous books on 20th century design as well as 20th century architecture, and also on monographs on the architect Philip Stark. And with this introduction, I give the floor to you. Patrizia, you are going to speak about a project that is not in Italy, but is in Taiwan. So please, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much for your presentation. I'm connected from Venice, and my paper is on, like you see, the invention of the present between criticism of the recent past and environmental urgencies. I study in particular the case of Tainan Spring by the Dutch studio MVRDV, and to metaphorically introduce this project, I refer to this writing. The title is "What is Modernity?" by Octavio Paz, when he says, to think about the now implies, first of all, recovering the vision. Reflecting on the now does not imply relinquishing the future or forgetting the past. The present is the meeting place for three direction of time. Sorry, I have to. No, I don't want to. No, sorry. So for me, this project is like a condenser of the most urgent problematics in our cities, starting from the abnormal growths of the city, like you see here, and the low quality of the building, the environmental pollution. So we more and more need spaces like this. This is a urban lagoon that when the people can stay together, can enjoy yourself, can stay relaxed. And this lagoon overlaps with this Chinatown Mall, dated 1983. This Chinatown Mall then was demolished in 1916, and sorry, I have some writings that appear on on the slide. Sorry. Non va avanti. There is some problem. I can go. At
Yes,
the
you
after.
can. Yes,
I don't
please.
know. So okay, sorry, it's blocked. So like you see also here, the architect preserve some part of the structure of this of the Chinatown Mall, in particular the level of the of the underground parking. And now, like you see, Chinatown Memory animates the new public space, and you have a situation like this. Tainan is the oldest city in Taiwan, and the main characteristic of the city are the beautiful, wonderful nature with water, greenery, and the main activities are port activities, commercial traffic, and fishing. And these activities, these are the main activities for a long time in Tainan. Here, the project is here in the West Central District in Tainan. And you can see here a comparison between the principal change, between the main changes between past and present. This Chinatown Mall was born in 1983 in the blind area of a port that you see here, that dried up in 1960, and the goal was to build a shopping mall, a Chinatown Mall, that can systematizing in some way some commercial activities that you can find here one time every year at the beginning of the year. And here you see the front, very traditional front of this Chinatown Mall, and this is the rear with an anonymous architecture. This is a residential building. And here you can see there's this mall was affected very soon by progressive decline. In particular, the main reason for this decline is that very near born a new central shopping district, very near to the Tainan railway station. We have a lot of stores, new stores. So this is the main reason for the demolition, the demolition of the Chinatown Mall. In this direction, the Urban Development Bureau of the Tainan City government launched an international competition for this area, starting from Chinatown Plaza, where you see there was the Chinatown Mall, until this street, Ayan Road, a very trafficked street in Tainan. And you can see also a lot of ventilation shaft that comes from the underground parking. So the designer have to redesign, to refresh all these key axes with greenery, and also the goal is to restore the hydrophilic function of the area. And MVRDV create this project where the principal actor are landscape and living. So they create a very greenery road for Iron Road and this urban lagoon. In some way, rediscover the old characteristic of Tainan. In fact, Bini Mas says Tainan is a very great city. With the reintroduction of the jungle to every place that was possible, the city is reintegrated into the surrounding landscape. The architect start with an opening act to rediscover the water, create the Lagoon Plaza, preserve 162 concrete pillar. This concrete pillar design a contemporary forum in some way. They design also, create also a new microclimate and insert hills and many plants along Iron Road, and also think to redesign the ventilation shaft that comes from the underground parking. By my point of view, this is an important example of architecture as built criticism from a different point of view. In particular, you have a direct comparison, no? Between preserving the old structure of the mall. You have a direct comparison between past and present, so the people are more conscious of the change between the Chinatown Mall and the new urban lagoon. You can see the history of the place also by a glass floor, like you see here. And for the same reason, you have a protected public park away from traffic. And for this, this is an enclosed place where that works also very well by an acoustic point of view for concert or other performance. Now you can see the vision is open on Tainan's former port canal, and the new ground level has become a landscape promenade overlooking the lagoon. Here you can see the stair to go inside the park. Other picture. And also you can practice this public park in the night, and the architects design a very soft lighting, delicate. And here you can see that now the vision, like I said, the vision is open on the canal, while before the Chinatown Mall blocked this vision of the canal. And you can do a lot of activities very different from shopping. Like in this case, you have a summer cinema. And I think in this regard, I think to the High Line in New York by Diller Scofidio and Renfro, where they recover an old elevated railway, from 1930, and they preserve the tracks, like you see here, of the railway, and create a public green park that is very away from traffic, but you are inside the city, exactly like in Tainan Spring. Then preserving the structure for you can also use. No, you can also protect yourself from the sound around. And here the architect also think to introduce other activities like a library, like a tea house, all different from shopping. A new microclimate has been designed, and you see this mister positioned all around the lagoon, provide localized cooling. The floor of the lagoon, like you see here, is formed of resin-bound fine pebbles that are very comfortable for your feet. And the iron rod now is very green, and you have only one line for each direction, so you have a diminution of the traffic in this sense. And this is existing underground parking, and you see that there are the ventilation shaft. Here you can see this very well, this ventilation shaft very well. And in my opinion, it's not very, is less interesting, this intervention, because less convincing, because in some way, very often these interventions are very banal and and amplify the volume of the same ventilation shaft. Then the subject of green in our city, the camouflage of the building to do something against the environmental pollution in our city is very usual today. You can see very many projects like this, but in the effects of this project are very limited, because you are in a concrete jungle, and the people that can enjoy of this apartment are very few. So I think that project like this, like Tainan Spring, it's better. Because you have a green public space and all the people can enjoy all this place. This is the Wengzumo architect, comes second, and this is the project. Here you can see that the relation with the water is better in this project, is more extreme, but instead you have that the people are mere spectators of the landscape and not actors, like in MVRDV project. And this is the solution that they found for at Iron Road. In particular, they create an edible landscape where you have local plants with fruits that the restaurant can use in their kitchen. By my point of view, we do this project. If you look at this project, we are going, and also in general in our city, towards a kind of aesthetic releases. Because the possibility for the architect to build something in our city are very few, and very often they have to reuse the existing structure, like in this case. Says Winnie Maas, in Tainan Spring, people can bathe in the overgrown remains of the shopping mall. Children will soon be swimming in the ruins of the past. How fantastic is that? And the other, another important point, another important critique that you can have with this project is against the proliferation of shopping in our cities. Also, in the historical Italian center, and for this, these important city are very vulgarized by the shopping, like you see. I call this era an era of Rembrandt beauty. Why? Because beauty springs in some way from the progress of life itself. And you can have beauty or ugly by chance. In fact, Rembrandt's, I quote Georg Simmel, Rembrandt's figures are almost never beautiful. For Rembrandt, never sought any of his decisive values in beauty. Anyone immersed in Rembrandt for a while sometimes finds beauty to be almost like an outward appendage, to life's development from its own innermost sources. In some year now, in Tainan Spring, you don't have anymore the repetition of gesture, the routine of the shopping, but you have adventure, fun, invention, improvisation, creativity. And it is as if modernity in some way has collapsed, re-emerged, and rotate in a very successful performance of past and present that coexist, close but distant, a little like the rules imposed by the pandemic, and with the burden of contradiction that the truest modern spirit carries with it. In fact, I can, sorry, like say the philosopher Marshall Berman, sorry, but I can read to appropriate the modernities.
Patrizia.
No, just
Patrizia.
how I find it, because I can see the writing. Sorry. To appropriate the modernities of yesterday, I find the quote. Appropriate the modernities of yesterday can be at once a critique of the modernities of today, and an act of faith in the modernities and in the modern men and women of tomorrow and the day after tomorrow. Sorry, Wilfred, do you want to say something? Sorry.
Yes, you have taken more than your 15 minutes, and we're already
no, but I finish.
Okay.
It's okay. It's the end. criticism, in fact, is the characteristic of modernity. What is new is set over and against what is old, and is this constant contrast that constitutes the continuity of tradition. In fact, for Paz, modernity is not a doctrine, but a tradition, which would allow it to persist and to change at the same time, and to conserve is diversity.
Thank
So,
you. Patrizia, you have to finish now. I'm sorry.
Okay.
Because we are already a few minutes
No,
into
sorry.
the,
Okay.
the
No, but
presentation
this is
time
the
of the
last.
next month.
No,
Thank you.
sorry.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. We have to stop here. And in fact, we don't have time to for any discussions because you have also taken up the time of your discussion. I would like to remind presenters to stay within the 15 minutes if you do want questions after your presentation. So thank you, Patrizia, for your presentation. And we now move on to the presentation by Büsra Köroğlu, who comes to us from the Technical University in Graz in Austria. Büsra Köroğlu has completed her bachelor's and master's degrees in architecture at the Viennese University of Technology. Her diploma thesis dealt with the revitalization of a shipyard in Istanbul on the Golden Horn. During and after her studies, she worked in different architectural offices, Tabanioglu Architects in Istanbul, and including Roger Baumeister in Vienna. Currently, she's working at the Institute in Graz as an assistant and has recently started a PhD on critical changes that took place in Turkey at the beginning of the 20th century. So a highly controversial topic. She has studied at the Vienna International School and at the Bundesrealgymnasium in Vienna, then continued with the Technical University in Vienna with bachelor, and took her master's at the Technical University there, as I had mentioned. She's so you are already presenting your scheme. Thank you, Büsra, for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Thank you for the invitation. My presentation delves into the Turkish architectural landscape of early 20th century that was marked as significant transformation towards modernity. There are two influential figures, Ernst Egli and Sedat Hakkı Eldem played pivotal roles in shaping this architectural evolution. And my intention is to highlight the significant role of architecture, actually independently of its creators. While architects often have a central role in shaping the message of a building, once a building is completed and enters the public domain, it can take on a life of its own, contributing to cultural discussions and critiques. However, they can also be contrary to the original intention of its designer. So these two edifices exemplify the critical architecture of their time, in which one of them on the right resisted the self-confirming and non-negotiable dominant culture while also remaining connected to the characteristic of its place and its period. However, the other juxtaposition on the left reluctantly detached itself from its genealogy. Architecture in Turkey was self-evident before modernism, didn't really have critiques from outside, and the wooden balconies known as jumba in Turkish architecture are a distinctive feature of many Turkish houses, and gabled roofs and its form consisting of many geometries. compared to the cubic architecture. A traditional Turkish house didn't have a concept of dividing space into bedrooms, dining rooms, or living rooms. For them, each room simply meant a living space, and the main living space was in the middle of the room and can be, in this example, is in the middle, called sofa, where the living place took. And with the proclamation of the new Republic of Turkey, the traditional housing was regarded as an artifact from the past, so which was bringing along a Eurocentric ideology to the region. And this led to a robust dialogue between professions and very much influenced the future generations. New dominant schemes were introduced through the era of modernity, suppressing the traditional architecture. So there was a complete radical cut. And the reason for that was between 1924 and 1942, 40 foreign architects were invited from Germany, Austria, France, by Atatürk to participate in the modernization efforts of Turkey. And among them was Ernst Egli. And here we can see one of his memoirs that he wrote coming from Vienna. And he published it in ETH Zurich. And his first encounter with Atatürk. So he was in a very good relationship with Atatürk, who commissioned him immediately to make comments on the ongoing projects in Ankara. And upon his arrival, he looked at this Gazi school designed by Mimar Kemalettin, and his comment was to remove the pointed arches from the windows and changing the size of the entrance because it was too monumental, and reducing the size of the dome. Of course, coming from a Viennese practicing culture, this building was for him a foreign language. And of course, being an architect requires to be judged for your own work and receptive to criticism by your colleagues. And the creator, thinker, and architect engage with the world through the openness to the critique. However, some local architects felt threatened by the opinions of their foreign counterparts, because for them, the spirit of the age was entangled with the practice of imitation. After Egli's observations and immersion in Turkish culture, he began to insist as a foreigner on respecting the values of vernacular architecture. So there's a ironic critical situation he has, because he is saying that we need to work with the geography and climate and praise the traditional values in modern terms. And he was coming from a different zeitgeist, but he made his publications in magazines, writing text about this. And he started to look at the existing structures in Istanbul, re-evaluating what has long been considered unimportant or secondary. On the other hand, the demand of Turkish society to own modern houses was arising. So in this sense, architects reluctantly were obliged to serve the quest of the transition to the Western style. Therefore, a radical reformation and social change in its form of living and furniture took place. And there were publications in magazines, as you can see on the slide, saying that cubic architecture is clean, hygienic, and also economical. And another journal published, Architect Journal, which was established by local architects. There were various local and external references to the question of Turkey's modernization process. And the architect Abdullah Ziya featured interior images that were analyzed in terms of their functions separately, such as guest room, dining room, and bedroom, which wasn't the case for a traditional Turkish house. And there were suddenly new furnitures being introduced into the rooms. For most of the 1930s, the construction industry, however, on the other side, was in a very poor state. So not only ideas were imported, but also material importation took place from foreign countries. There were only few cement factories and no iron and steel produced in the country until 1937. So they were still dependent on Germany or France and Italy. On this case, I would like to come to the point where one of the case studies was influenced by this Villa Ragab Devres, designed by Ernst Egli. He was known soon for his expertise in the type of villa and was commissioned by the engineer Ragab Devres for this project site. And the main characteristic, as you can see, compared to the previous examples, it's very pure light and white modernist form of steel and glass. And here we can see some interior pictures that I have received from the Devres family myself. And upon talking to the owner, I can say that the owners were also the subject of the decisions and that were made during the construction of the house, because they were aware of their desire for a modern house that contrasted to the traditional one. And in fact, Turkey, as I said, had no industry. So in this house, there were also a lot of importation of materials that took place, such as the door handles, roll blinds from Germany were imported. And another picture of the wood cladding on the walls, the dark wall paneling built in cupboards and buffets show actually a bit of influence of Viennese interiors, such as those in Moller House by Adolf Loos, built in 1928. There is no accurate information about this, how much he got influenced by Adolf Loos himself, but if you look at the times they were built are very similar. And there is an interior such as the Moller House. And at the same time, the absence of the divan as the classic Ottoman seating or the furniture or the low table is a clear signal of a dawn of a new era. And suddenly the rooms also earned a meaning, and so did the Western furniture that were occupying the space, which didn't exist before. Another view from the garden side. And when you look at the Moller House exterior, very similar with its white terraces, steel supports and balcony railings, flat roof, panoramic windows, showing a lot of similarities. This building was a product of its era, setting itself apart from others in a radical manner, not a source of criticism maybe, but as it was a subject of criticism. The used materials or forms challenged or critiqued the prevailing architectural trends and social values of the society. Yet maybe the difficulty of architecture still today is to equalize the wishes as an architect with the client. And as Philip Johnson mentions in his lecture called The 7 Crutches of Modern Architecture, you can escape all the criticism if you can say, well, the client wanted it that way. In this case, Egli was only translating his architecture from the demands of the owners and not according to the criteria of the social and architectural standards in Turkey, as he actually researched. And this, I would like to move on to my next study, the very rarely found not demolished edifice by Sedat Hakkı Eldem, a local architect of Turkey who studied abroad and came back. Unlike Egli, Eldem was designing a house for his own relatives, and in this case, the client was his sister and brother-in-law. And the homeowners also expressed their wish for this house, and this time the inspiration came from a Japanese style, emphasizing structural lightness and materials. The house was formed by the enlargement of an existing country house in Princess Island, and in response to the request, veranda on wooden pillars that surround the house on 3 sides, overhanging views and gabled roofs were made. One of the distinctive architecture feature is the balcony composition. It takes the form of a deck like in a ship with flooring, wooden flooring like in a ship. And on the right side, you can see the Le Corbusier example. And there are some signs that also that he had in himself influences from Frank Lloyd Wright and Le Corbusier, but still managed to synthesize it in a Turkish traditional style. These 2 houses distinguish themselves, of course, through their expression of the enforced modernistic styles. Villa on the left didn't advocate for the abandonment of traditional architecture. Instead, it reinterpreted them. However, Egli was captured by the demands of the client, which was based on the admiration of a machine with charm of hygienic, clean services, which was the case for many upper-class families. And And we can see that in the elevation that they both have different languages. More and importantly, Eldam was defending a visual unity, in order to avoid disorder in the formal language of buildings. And he was teaching at the Academy of Arts in his studio houses with pitched roofs, wide overhanging eaves, and narrow vertical windows. So he was following the path very strictly in his own work as well. And one can see how unwanted traditional elements of Turkish house managed to find their placement and still establish a respect from the viewers. Another example that I thought I should include is the Oriental Coffee House by Eldam, which gained a lot of respect from modernists and also from traditions. It was a guiding principle of the movement with its exterior and interior appearance. The coffee house was actually taking a reference of a local architecture which was built in 17th century, unwanted and forgotten, with all sides window, and in the middle there's a fountain to be found, and wooden materials on the walls. And it was published as a modern Turkish architecture. It became a reference to the local architecture. And here I would like to close my examination, and this whole thing reminds me of a story of Tower of Babel, where the human race, speaking one common language and suddenly couldn't communicate with each other anymore. Metaphorically, Turkey found itself in a very similar situation, and suddenly many ideas were imported and expected to be captured and applied in architectural construction. The examples I showed, Villa Ragıp Devres and the summer house, Fethi Hokyar, serve as demonstrative cases of the architect's role, influencing how the critical potential of architectural types can be utilized. Within the context of summer house, Eldam aimed to strike a balance between preserving continuity and introducing elements of unity to a new architecture. And his approach can be described as amenable, wherein he criticized the unreserved adoption of architectural modernism without completely rejecting them, while Egli exhibited a contextual sensibility into account factors such as climate, zoning, and function. He was focusing on the technical and practical values by seeking for the timeless essence of architecture, heritage of people or nation. Architecture always relies on references, and at times we can be readily influenced by other ideas. And Egli exhibited a contextual sensitivity, taking into account many factors, as I said, climate, zoning, and function in the question. And in his edifices, he was focusing on them and on the essence of the architectural heritage. So I would like to end my presentation by highlighting how visiting these houses reveals that architecture is a multi-faced art form, a manifestation of subjective perspectives, and there is no absolute right or wrong in this regard. And as John Locke quotes, buildings cannot lie, and they tell the truth directly or by implication about those who made or used them. And I would like to thank, by the way, Berna and Elias for also correcting my paper and helping me out.
Thank you, Priscilla, for this.
Yes, that was a quick talk. I had to.
No, that was just
made it on time.
Perfectly timed, wonderfully timed. Thank you. And a two-pronged approach to the topic of architecture's build criticism. I open the discussion. We have 5 minutes to ask questions or make some comments on Büsra's paper. Please, does anybody have a comment? Please, Elias.
Hello, Büsra. Nice to meet you from, let's say, close. You can call Zoom close. And just to say that we're not correcting your paper with Berna, more thinking along with it, because the issue that you touched upon, I think, is very pertinent to many countries and civilizations on the periphery of the West. And the introduction of modern architecture is also an attempt to modernize society itself. And there you find examples like Haki Eldem in Turkey, Pikionis in Greece, and many other countries who resist this kind of automatic approach, and they try to look at local practices and gain from their wisdom. I'm quite curious, and I do not know whether Haki Eldem's approach found any continuation. Was there either thinkers on architecture or actual architectural practice? Because what I have seen in other countries, including my own, is that you tend to get very often pastiche, regional, kind of like fake imitations that do not follow this kind of model that Eldem, for example, proposed. So how did that go on after Eldem?
I think, I mean, I come from I studied in Vienna, and Eldem approached into my life just recently, like a year ago. I myself didn't know him actually, even though I found out actually he's the Adolf Loos of Turkey, and this was what they told me in a friend of mine. I was like, I want to write, I want to find out more about him, and she was like, this is someone who is Adolf Loos of Turkey. And having researched about him now, I see a lot of architects, like contemporary architects, who took him as an example and also managed to follow the same path, like Turgut Cansever, who works very a lot with regionalism and works with the local materials, and takes Turkish, like the original Turkish house, also a step further. In the contemporary, I could say that this is a case, and but more than that, I am also in a point of a research for that. So, yeah.
Okay, thank you. And if you could write those names on chat, it would be interesting to look them up. Thank you.
Okay, I'll do right then.
I think it's fair to say that there's been a very powerful media campaign by certain forces in the West that have, in a way, outplayed a lot of other what Elias called marginal or peripheral societies, and I think that's still something that needs to be uncovered. That there are actually a lot of other figures that are worth exploring and that have genuine contributions to contemporary architecture or modern architecture. I just have one little comment. I'm not convinced that your comparison of the ship's deck literally translates to the series of pillars, the space between the wall and the pillars, as something equivalent. I would sort of caution you to make that kind of a easy link. And perhaps on a more fundamental level, I think Loos always remained a classicist, even though there are certain kinds of plain white simple facades. So in a way, you could say he was essentializing classical architecture, whereas Egli's work, I think, genuinely tries to move forward into a kind of an asymmetry, more conventional modernist architecture. And I'll just leave it at that and give the floor to others who would like to maybe add comments or questions. Is there anybody else? Because if there isn't, I'd like to thank Büsra very much for that very interesting exploration and juxtaposition of two opposing or different positions. And I'd like to welcome Pan Mengfei, who is based in Japan at the Kogu Gakuin University in Tokyo, where she has been an assistant professor since 2002 in the Faculty of Tourism and Community Management. She was a research associate at the Graduate School of International Management at the Aoyama Gakuin University and has been pursuing a doctoral course in information technology and society in Asia at the Graduate School of Interdisciplinary Information Studies at the University of Tokyo. Her PhD thesis was entitled Locating and Localizing the Art Networks, a sociological examination of the roles of place in art networks in Ueno, Tokyo, in the Meiji period. So I give the floor to you, Pan-Ming Fei, and we're looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you very much. Actually, I have found a lot in common with the previous presentation. Maybe we can later discuss at the end of the session. So first of all, I would really like to thank Professor Wilfred Wang and my mentor, Louise Noella Gula, for giving me all the support during the process of preparing this paper and presentation. And one more thing, in my time zone, it's already 10 p.m. I think we're gonna run into the midnight. Just let me apologize first if my brain slowly shuts down. I had 2 coffees already. I hope I can stay awake. So you can see my presentation today, and it has a title, Architecture as Unbuilt Criticism, Revisiting Maegawa Kunio's 1931 Museum Proposal. But before I take you to the year of 1931 and the site of this museum, Ueno, which is also my PhD thesis about, I would like to start with a current exhibition in Shanghai featuring Arata Isozaki, where you would find a project that makes an echo with Maegawa's museum project, which I'm going to introduce to you in details. To add something personal, I briefly worked at Isozaki's atelier, and he was a really energetic architect, proliferate writer, and gourmet as well, and having great inspiration for me in many ways. In this paper, I borrowed the term unbuilt that Isozaki first used for an exhibition in publications in 2001. By unbuilt, he referred to the projects that were never realized and came out kind of ahead of its age, but were crucial enough that make architectural history. He particularly mentioned his proposal for the new Tokyo, this one, the new Tokyo City Hall in 1985, while all the other applicants, including his master Tange Kenzo, proposed super high rises. Isozaki submitted a high medium rise that contained a great hall inside. Today, Tange's tower has become a landmark in Western Shinjuku, while Isozaki's designed varying forms of prints, models made of wood, and photography, groused many's imagination of the alternative. And right after release of the result, one of the committee members of the competition and also friend of Isozaki, architectural critic, whose name is Ito Teiji, associated Isozaki City Hall with Maegawa Kunio's museum proposal half a century ago. And both those designs were not expected, and their defeat was kind of intentional. And I would like to argue that the deliberate defeats were to criticize. Now let's take a time travel to the early 1930s. It was a time many things in architectural world had just started to take form. Architectural journalism, as termed by Miyauchi Yoshihisa, architectural critic, he said that the journalism bloomed in the 1920s. Modernist movements and works overseas were introduced to Japan by young architects, and debates over the profession of architects also unfolded, particularly through the emerging architectural magazines. I think Professor Palasama, on the first days of the conference, mentioned that today we are facing the crisis of architecture since modernity, as it's becoming a technocratic tool. And a century ago, it was another kind of struggle. It was a transition period when the profession as autonomy was to be established and the architectural world faced generational faction, one part supporting localism and the other internationalism, which is also brought up by the previous presenter. The 1930 and the 1931 museum competition marks as a crucial event that raised debates and criticism at the time regarding architectural styles and the practices of architectural competitions, and also rippling responses, such as those seeing it as a harbinger of modernist movement and Itoteji's further association with Isozaki's unbuilt City Hall in the 1980s. And now about this specific museum, it stands in the Ueno Park and had been a site of national self-image, public face of the new Meiji government from the 1868, and symbolizing the new aesthetics of the nation, imperial household, and modernity, and played a role in emphasizing the memory of the previous Tokugawa regime. Its previous building was designed, as I'm showing here, by the British architect Josiah Kondo, but heavily damaged in the 1923 Great Kanto earthquake. The competition I'm going to introduce to you was to gather designs for the new building. At the time of the competition, the 25-year-old Maegawa had just returned to Japan after 2 years of training at the Le Corbusier's atelier in Paris, and he was among over 200 applicants who proposed the new building. And his design distinguished itself from the others in three major ways, in three main ways. The competition guideline required the style to be oriental based on Japanese taste, which caused tremendous controversy. And an inner plan was also attached to the guideline. So the applicants were suggested to design the exterior based on the plan. We can see that all the prized works were with gabled and tiled roofs, showed some efforts to incorporate some motifs of traditional Japanese architecture. And Maegawa's design, in contrast, you can see how different it is, was clearly influenced by that of Le Corbusier, featuring connected box-like buildings, a pilotis at the center, long horizontal windows, and a flat roof. And all the prized works had similar inner plans, as they only altered the reference plan slightly, while Maegawa's has created an original edge-shaped one. And the most actually extraordinary thing about Maegawa's proposal is that he extended his proposal well beyond the building and the museum premise to the Ueno Park. He broadened and straightened the roads in front of the building and added a rotary at the southwest end in the park, enabling automobile mobility and direct access to the museum entrance. On the left side, you can see a map in 1925 shows the winding roads for pedestrians in the park, which remains almost the same today. Maegawa's plan on the right side actually broadens and straightens the roads and also registered the neighboring buildings with the new Baroque Hyokegan, which is here, right here, and another two museums at the two flanks of the park, and also the symmetric roads. This proposed park was envisioned as a kind of monumental plaza where these cultural facilities clustered. And the proposal takes an urban scale, revealing Maegawa's urbanist considerations regarding traffic, access, and the relationship between a single museum building and its physical environment. And this museum marked Maegawa's debut in Japan and caught it a wider attention through the media. Maegawa's works and essays were published in three magazines, Kenjiku Sekai, or Architectural World, Kokusai Kenjiku International Architecture, and Shin Kenjiku New Architecture, and which contributed to his growing reputation. The essays were written in a passionate tone, expressing his grief over the unfortunate competition. In essays, he stresses the necessity of white walls for accurate observation of art, and that authentic Japanese architecture should never mix traditional forms with contemporary concrete structures. So an essay titled Makeleba Zokugu in Japanese, or If I Fail, I'm Just a Member of the Rebellion Troop, has been widely quoted and celebrated as it symbolizes Maegawa's courage and a resistance to the predominant aesthetics. The title stemmed from a slang in the Meiji period. Those who win become the official army, and those who fail are just the rebellion troop, lamenting the misfortune of those who aligned with the failing Tokugawa shogunate during the Civil War in 1868 and 1869. Maegawa's self-labeling of Zokugu mobilized this kind of popular sympathy for losers in Japanese culture and justified his designs and claims. Maegawa's proposal won wide support for following rational thinking that simple forms would fulfill the function of the museum. And the critics and architects at the time, including Yasuda Kiyoshi and Kawakita Renshiro, praised his design as scientific and rational. In Maegawa's own words, his design offers a new definition of the architectural Japanese taste. In the explanatory essay submitted to the competition, he states that he gathered courage to submit his proposal as he believed the best presents the Japanese characteristics. He rejected gabled roofs, which he saw as fake Japanese architecture, and offered another interpretation of Japanese taste, which follows updated materials and technology. He also emphasized the joint responsibility of his peers and his regret regarding those who remained disengaged. The Nihon International Kenchikukai, the Japanese International Architectural Association, established by young architects inspired by modernism, declared that they would not participate in this competition as a means of protest. Maegawa, however, viewed this non-participation as regrettable and insisted that competitions were the only battlefield on which an architect could challenge the wrong architecture. So the consciousness of all architects as members of a collective community that Maegawa called for did find echoes at the time. Kawakita Renshiro, I mentioned earlier, also published an essay paying respect to Maegawa, noting that his work made no compromise while many others just showed little effort as architects. And in a cartoon by Niwa Yoshi, which is shown on the right side, released in the August issue of Kokusai Kenchiku in 1931, also highlighted Maegawa as a hero. There was a Chinese poem, if you do read Chinese, it's on the right bottom right, by a Tang poet Zhang Jiuling in the Tang Dynasty, which originally criticized the court and quoted here. The cartoon compares Maegawa to a lone swan that came over from the sea, while the Japanese taste is like a tree under threats of earthquakes and termites at its root. So now we, just by revisiting by the Maegawa's museum proposal in 1931, we see a precedent of those lost in competition, but intended to criticize and achieved in gaining wider attention. The unbuilt criticisms in 1931 and 1985 formed somehow a lineage that involved a culture that honors the defeated. And the two cases are not just fantasies or utopian images, but courageous statements that call for reflections on the possibilities of the alternatives. So that's the end of my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Han Mengfei. I use the Chinese way of the word order.
Yeah.
Are there any comments that members of the audience would like to make, or questions? I found this presentation very interesting. Anna Tostosh has a question, please.
Oh, thank you so much for your presentation on this not so well-known Maekawa project. And I would say that it's very enlightening to realize that afterwards, in the same, not the same place, but in the Ueno Park, he was able to make one of his, let's say, most extraordinary works. But it's really curious to understand that, in fact, he was the first one in Japan to have has this courage to approach a different way of thinking, in a way perhaps more, I don't know if you agree, more Japanese, I mean, following the tradition than, let's say, the Josiah Condor design. I don't know what you think about this. If I was clear.
Yeah. I might need you to might need some need you to extend a little bit about your comment and questions. So you think he's the first one in leading this movement, but he's not really the first one. He has a lot of colleagues and peers supporting this movement. He was just one of them, but something very unique about him is that he managed to travel abroad and to study and get training under Le Corbusier, and became that kind of privileged leader when he came back from outside. And it was actually, he was quite lucky to be able to meet the kind of shifting period inside Japan when the government were actually seeking non-Western ways to express architecturally and aesthetically. So Josiah Kondo's styles would be kind of outdated, but the others were still struggling to find out whether those gabled roofs that I just showed would be the right way to express the local tradition, or the international ways of those kind of modernist architecture would be the right way. So there was still the struggling time, but Michael would later on became a leader of that movement. I'm not sure if I answered your question. If you could add some comments, maybe I can answer better.
Perhaps later on. I think that for the moment is okay. Otherwise, I will use all the time, and I think Louise Noel has a question as well. Thank you.
Louise, please. Louise.
Yes, thank you. I enjoy your presentation, but I was wondering if you can add a little bit on the part of the road leading, because he not only designed the building, he also put forward the idea of changing the road. And this in relation to Japanese relation with landscape, that it's been always so, and is still very powerful. If you can add a little bit on that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, as I mentioned, it was the most extraordinary thing about his plan. The Ueno Park was actually very significant site as well. It was the temple for the shogunate. And so the Meiji government was utilizing it to turn it into a public park first, which is a Western invention, a Western model, and then to install the museums. The roads, Michael's mind was to let the cars, the motor automobiles, to get directly to the museum. However, before that, the park was only for pedestrians. So here was what is something on his mind. I think also he got inspirations from his works and projects at Le Corbusier's atelier as well. So he had a kind of planning for a larger scale that nobody actually expected.
Okay,
Thank you.
thank you. Thank you very much. Now you mentioned, I mean, we're going to break for an interval now, but you just mentioned that you had been working for Isozaki on the Tokyo Town Hall competition.
No, I worked for him very briefly.
I see.
From 2000, no, that's 1985. I was
Exactly,
not
it's
born.
1985. I was going to say you look far too young to be to having been
No,
working.
no. So, sorry, I caused that confusion.
Thank you for that clarification. I was wondering what kind of cream you had been applying to look so young after all these years. Thank you very much. We're now going to take a break of 10 minutes and we will return at 25 minutes past. So that's not exactly 10 minutes. We'll do a little catching up, but 25 past the hour when we continue with the two presentations, one by Trent Sexton and the other by Jaime Silva. Thank you. Hello, Elias.
How are you, Will?
Very well.
I'm sorry I could not attend. I'll see them on YouTube previous weekend because I was with 40 degrees temperature.
Oh my God. Yeah,
But
okay. We'll continue later.
Yeah. I'll see you in a minute. Bye.
So welcome back to the two final speakers of this session. They are Trent Sexton and Jaime Silva. We will begin with Trent Sexton's presentation. Trent Sexton is an architect and critic. He received his Master of Architecture degree from the University of Texas at Austin, and he holds a degree in civil engineering from Vanderbilt University and a degree in applied physics from Trevecca Nazarene University. He has worked in the United States at the firms Clayton Court in San Antonio and Kieran Timberlake in Philadelphia. Trent Sexton is Seeker's Associate Director for Awards. Trent, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Wilfred. Can you hear me and see my screen? Great. Thank you so much for the kind introduction, and thank you so much for having me here. It is such an honor and a pleasure to be here, and I am very, very glad to do it. I'll be presenting today on the Inujima Saidensho Art Museum by Hiroshi Sambuichi Architects, entitled Discursive Ecology. Every instance of architecture proposes both a way of seeing the world and of living within it. Through this lens, every intentional work of architecture is inherently critical. To judge the quality of this criticism, we must first note that the power of criticism lies in its ability to render change in the world by describing and advocating for betterment. This change is rendered through an audience, without which criticism is rendered null. So pivotal for a building to act as criticism is its ability to speak as well as be heard. And this constitutes a way in which we might assess the quality of a building's critique. How well does it communicate this critique to its audience, the public? Central to this analysis is the understanding that the language of built criticism is fundamentally different from that of textual criticism. It is a language of aesthetics rather than one just of linguistics. Leaning on the work of Alexander Baumgarten and Walid Beschty, we note that the term aesthetics is sourced from the Greek aesthetikos, relating to perception of the senses, rather than understanding reductively limited to visual information. So aesthetic meaning arises through physical experience. And if we take meaning as that which engenders particular outcomes, then aesthetics are a form of communication which manifest certain ways of acting and living. And this case study is a rare example of architecture doing so in a way wholly distinct from the capabilities of art, while also in intimate concert with both artistic and environmental production. The Inujima Saidensho Art Museum was completed in 2008 by Hiroshi Sambuichi Architects and is sited on the remains of an abandoned copper refinery in the Seto Inland Sea of Japan. The museum provides all water, ventilation, and energy through on-site passive means, excluding just emergency lighting. And it houses the work of artist Yukinori Yanagi as its sole exhibition. Yanagi's work, in concert with the architecture, provides a critical commentary on Japan's current cultural trajectory and is in turn housed within the physical and intellectual lineage of Yukio Mishima, a figure whose fierce critique of Japan's modern industrialization led dramatically to his death in 1970. So the prevailing canon of architectural thought presents architecture and modernization as allied forces in both their means and ends. One has to look no further than such voices as Le Corbusier to find rhetoric absolutely dripping with this, and rarely do architectural works interrogate the utility or legitimacy of this view. This museum is an example of doing so, both through local and regional cultural icons, as well as universal architectural icons, but also, most importantly, communicated by wielding sustainable architectural features as discursive ecological aesthetics, moving beyond solely technical functions and into the phenomenological, a deeply important critical positioning on which to stance sustainable architecture. The island of Inujima is a small island located off the eastern coast of Japan in the Seto Inland Sea. It's small, it's approximately 4 kilometers in circumference and houses a very small village, population of about 75. Historically, the island was used for granite quarrying. You can see a series of lakes, which are the remnants of that. And on the western side of the island, there is still one active quarry. On the eastern side of the island, you can see is where we have our museum sited on the copper refinery remains. The refinery was built in Inujima in 1909 during the Meiji period, a period of rapid industrialization. And the result of this refinery's processes were rapid contamination of the island and surrounding sea. After only 10 years of operation, the refinery was shut down and left to ruin, and was virtually untouched from 1919 until 2001, when it was selected by the Benicia Corporation as the site for this museum. When you reach the site, the first thing you're greeted by are the ruins of, of this refinery, excuse me. Black brick extends walls and floors, remains of walls and floors. And this black brick is in fact Karami brick, a slag brick, which is formed as a byproduct of the copper smelting process. The brick contains a large percentage of iron and glass, and thus has special thermal qualities. It has an exceptionally high thermal capacity, but it also readily conducts heat from the air due to its high metallic content, something we'll get more into later. You can see the iridescent sheen on the bricks here. As you're walking through, eventually a pair of granite posts stand out to the east, framing steps down to the sea, and looking back behind you, another pair of granite posts in line frame the path to the entrance of the museum. So already the relationship of sea to entry is being emphasized. And that's again something we'll get into later. The singular path through the museum is comprised of the Earth Gallery, the Energy Hall, the Chimney Hall, and the Sun Gallery, as named by the architects. And it leads visitors through Yukinori Yanagi's artwork, Hero Dry Cell, composed in 6 pieces. The axis about which these works revolve is the issue of modernization and Japan's troubled relationship with it. For the sake of time, I will not get too much into the life of Yukio Mishima, but he was a fierce incendiary critic of modernization in Japan, and particularly in regards to the cultural social cost of it, claiming that it was making Japan inorganic, neutral, and drab, degrading culture. He eventually actually tried to attempt a coup of the government, took over the eastern headquarters of Japan's self-defense forces, took the commandant hostage, tried to rouse the soldiers into rebellion by way of his final manifesto, his speech, Geki, and this failed, and immediately afterwards he committed ritual suicide, seppuku. So the museum enters this narrative first through the Earth Gallery. This is soon after you enter. And this house is Yanagi's work, Icarus Cell. The Earth Gallery appears as a long, straight hall leading towards a strange light. Recorded sounds permeate the space, resembling wind or possibly a furnace. Looking in front of you, you see this strange white light, and looking behind, you see a projection of a sun. The Karami bricks reflecting the light of both very strongly. Undulating Corten steel walls line the gallery, and they themselves resemble industrial prefabricated steel sheet piling. As you move through this area, you eventually find that it is not a straight hall, but a series of 90-degree turns framed by mirrors. And at the end, a mirror is placed into the ground, which is giving you a view of the sky. So what you were looking forward to the whole time is actually a view of the sky, with the view angled just enough northward to prevent any sight of the sun. Visitors then pass into the Energy Hall, which opens up from the Earth Gallery into a large vaulted space. In the center is Yanagi's solar rock, where hang the disassembled remains of Yukio Mishima's study, suspended over a 44-ton slab of Inujima granite, and upon which a pool of water rests. And reflected in this pool of water, you can see the black wood behind, resembling the facade of a house, also resembles the silhouette of a sun in a solar eclipse. Moving through here, one passes into Icarus Tower, passing by Slagnote. And Icarus Tower is housed in the Chimney Hall, where the remains of the copper refinery's chimney stack is operating as a ventilation device. Here you have more disassembled remains of Mishima's home, as well as urinals arranged in a faux Zen garden. In addition to the life of Yukio Mishima, the other primary narrative at work in Hero Dry Cell is the myth of Icarus. Icarus Cell plunges visitors in underground in suspension between earth and sky, resembling the mythological labyrinth in which Icarus and Daedalus, an inventor and technician, were imprisoned. And as the story, which many of us probably know, goes, Daedalus crafted wings for himself and Icarus to escape. However, when they made their flight, Icarus flew too close to the sun, became overconfident, and fell into the sea and drowned. Also worth noting that Daedalus himself was built by, or the labyrinth itself was built by Daedalus, himself an architect and inventor. So his creation itself was what ensnared him. Beyond this lies a small room called Mirror Note, and passing through here is the Sun Gallery, where one's released from the dark into a bright sunlit glazed hall of wood, steel, and brick. And here's Unagi's last piece, Solar Note. Solar Note is again made from the remnants of Mishima's once home, this time from his 8 tatami mat room. And in the center lies Mishima's travel bag, and around which hang words, which are the words from Mishima's final manifesto, Geki. The architecture of the museum is inseparable from the art, being incorporated intrinsically into each piece, and yet it also provides critiques that stand on its own beyond the art. While Yanagi's work is more concerned with the socio-cultural implications of modernization, the architectural semiotics offer a supplemental framework for contemplating the effects of modernization on our environment. The whole of Inujima Seidensho Museum is intimately tied to natural circumstance. Its procession itself is designed as a passive heating and cooling engine tuned with extraordinary sensitivity to its site. This is accomplished first in orientation. The entrance of the building opens eastward to the sea, the direction of prevailing winds on site, creating a consistent air intake for the museum. The movement of air is further driven by the chimney hall. The glass atrium at the base of the chimney hall here heats up the air, allows the hot air to rise and escape through the chimney, whose air intake is located at this base. So the driving force from either end of the air's path keeps it moving through the museum, creating ventilation and cooling as it travels along the long, highly insulated earth gallery. The highly conductive steel lining the earth gallery, as well as the Karami bricks with their high thermal storage capacity, draw the heat out of the air as it passes through the long tunnel. The length of the tunnel, in fact, was not only chosen for the impact of the art, but to allow ample surface area for these materials to draw heat out of the air. In the winter, the doors to the earth gallery are closed, and the doors to the sun gallery over here on the left are opened. And this allows a new passage of energy in which air being heated is circulating through the museum, creating, again, comfortable experiences year-round. The lighting of the museum as well relies solely on the sky and sun. The sun gallery and chimney hall are illuminated by their large glazed portions, and the earth gallery, an 80-meter long tunnel, is lit entirely by a single skylight and 9 mirrors. And all of these things contain poetic content. The notion of moving towards the sky or sea, which is so central to the art, also acts as the device for lighting the entirety of the underground tunnel. The constant rise of air heated by the sun further echoes the narrative of Icarus, while also functioning as passive ventilation. In fact, the energy hall, where the volume opens up for convection, the artworks become suspended, sensitive to movement in the air, and consequently the doors hanging in Icarus Tower spin slowly from the air drawn into the chimney. So the movement of air is subtly but powerfully made visceral in experience, all while being dexterously integrated with the art. The movement of air, the passage of the sun, these processes of the earth are made explicit in the architecture, both in conversation with the art and with the earth. Thus, most architectural moves work at multiple levels, both poetic and pragmatic. The museum continues its sustainable functions in multiple ways. First, quite simply, trees are planted both for shade and for soil remediation on the heavily toxified site. Waste is processed waste and water reuse also takes place on the site. The wastewater is processed through this algae pond you see in front of you, purified and reused on site. And additional waste from this process is used as fertilizer for the trees. The materials themselves in the building also provide substantive expressive content in regards to the building's relationship with the earth. The Karami brick has a discernible relationship to the site's industrial history, a discernible nature as an industrial byproduct. You can see the iridescent sheen from the slag on most bricks, and a discernible thermal property. You can easily feel the high thermal content if you touch it. The brick reminds one of the site's industrial past, of our past and present history of harmful production processes, all while functioning as a highly effective thermal tool throughout the museum. They line the earth gallery to draw heat out of the air and dissipate it into the ground, cooling the space, while they line the sun gallery to absorb and store the sun's heat. In the earth gallery, their iridescence reflects the red light of the projected sun and the white-blue light of the sky at either end of the passage, and elsewhere, they reflect the light of the true sun. So the material is used to its full potential to fulfill sustainable functions, to make them palpable, and to remind us of the nature of our relationship to the earth. The granite used throughout the museum also carries similar expressive content. The stone is taken from Inujima's once bustling quarry, and the quarried granite explicitly but subtly expresses its quarrying by way of scars left on the stone from the quarrying process. So the fact that the stone was taken from the earth, that it had to be torn from the ground with industrial tools, is made a part of its surface patterning. And the third principal material, Corten steel, is related in a rather straightforward way. It weathers. This speaks to the particularity of Inujima as an island. The salty sea breeze gives the Corten a particular speckled pattern. But it also speaks more specifically to the circumstance of the museum's passive processes. Inside the museum, the steel has also weathered, speaking to the fact that this museum is entirely open to air from the outdoors, and the sea breeze is what's cooling everything inside. The conceptual content does not stop with the material choices themselves, but extends to the nature of construction and detailing. Almost all of the details speak to the buildings and thus our relationship to the earth in some way. The exterior of the steel on the earth gallery skylight is angled on the north and south ends at the same angle of the interior, while the east and west sides remain plumb, subtly reinforcing the importance of the angle in avoiding any glimpses of the sun. The glass roof of the sun gallery slips over the edges of the walls, emphasizing its function in bringing in light and heat. And the brick is used as a metering system for details such as ventilation registers, highlighting passive components, while also highlighting the modular industrial quality of the material. One particularly interesting cue can be found in the structural detailing of the sun gallery. The structure here becomes trabeated, and you can see that from the wood columns, they have steel connectors to the structure above. This is somewhat a reference to the ghost of traditional Tokyo bracketing. Wood is robbed of its ability to bear on wood and instead mediated by industrial processes. But also brought to attention is the fact that this uses much less material. The steel requires much less material and much less filled space to function. Of also particular significance is the construction of the granite walls. Each piece of stone is custom cut to fit among its partners. And rather than being standardized, it's a decidedly pre-modern technique and adds a potent ambiguity to the work. It's a modern building, but is built with both modern and pre-modern techniques. The industrial and pre-industrial meet at the entrance, the bricks forming an almost gaping wound in the entry. And the form of the granite walls also contributes to the conceptual framework. The entirety of the building is shaped as a large mound with a more pronounced mound rising over the energy hall and solar rock. And the granite on the lower portion of this mound is built in very much the same way as castle walls were built. The Osaka Castle here was actually built with the same granite from Inujima. However, rather than a castle on top of our mound, we simply get another mound covered in nothing but grass. In this mound over Mishima's disassembled study, the stone is round and uncut, calling to mind the Japanese fukiishi roofing stone method of covering kofun burial mounds, in which river stone was affixed to low angled slopes and mortared together. So what was expected to be a castle, perhaps for the copper refinery, perhaps for Mishima, is instead a grave. So throughout the museum, we are given palpable representations of the impacts of modernization while always having a background exhibiting the pre-modern, reminding us that there are other options for progress available to us. However, this is not a building about explicitly condemning or affirming modernization. It is meant to prompt us to critically reassess modernization's role in our lives and how it has changed the way we relate to the earth, to think about what is given and taken away by it. In this way, Sambui-Uchi architects certainly use high-tech approaches in many of their buildings, but low-tech, pre-modern solutions are also used. Interwoven with this narrative is the building's ecological aspect. The building is quantifiably sustainable. Human procession and ventilation take the very same path, and details consistently indicate the relation to local air and material flow. Thus, the Inujima Seidensho Museum offers an alternative of what a modern building can be, one that utilizes both modern techniques and pre-industrial passive techniques with a critical eye, offering an alternative to the modernized concept of consumption and energy use. And I'll end with a brief image of one of my favorite places in the museum is actually the bathroom, where they place diagrams all along the walls, explicitly laying out how these processes work to users of the museum. Thank you.
Thank you, Trent, for that very detailed reading of this building. Who would like to ask a question or make a comment? Louise.
Thank you, Trent. I enjoyed your presentation of this very impressive building. It really means a lot. But alongside with the criticism of the building itself, I wonder, in such a small island, this museum, who visits it? What is it really for? Or is it just like 1919, it was left empty and now it's another empty space? I don't know. That's a critical question, but I thoroughly enjoyed your presentation.
Thank you. And that's a great question. It is a nearly abandoned island, and it has arguably been somewhat successful in bringing visitors. It's Inujima and Naoshima Islands are all part of the Setouichi Art Biennale. There are a lot of artworks and buildings scattered throughout the islands. On Inujima, there's actually quite a number of artworks by Kazuyo Sejima as well. So it's a pilgrimage site almost for art goers rather than just being this one museum. There are dozens of museums all across the islands and quite a bit of a ferry network leading to them. But part of the impetus for the museum does warrant critique. It was hoped to be somewhat of a revitalization for this island. And while it does, I believe, have pretty good visitor traffic, the island itself, the population on the island has continued to dwindle. The average age is around 80 now, I think. And it's gone from having about 150 residents to having 75. So arguably successful in attracting visitors somewhat. It's not quite as remote as it seems, but maybe not so successful as a revitalization of the island's social quality itself.
Well,
Thank you.
Thank you. It's I mean, there are very few tombs that revitalize places, except for, of course, the most obvious one.
May I just very quick, I suggest you add this in your final paper. this part also, because I think it's important for whomever is going to read your article. I think this part should be added because you have it very clear and it cleared me a lot. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Han Mengfei had a question or comment.
Yeah, thank you very much. I visited a museum 2 years ago in the summer. I just add something, well, add some information. The access was really bad. There was only 2 ferries a day, and during typhoon, you can imagine, you could not access the island. And I think Trent has already mentioned this, because of the depopulation in those island areas, these museums were given very strong expectation to be able to revitalize the local community. So my question would be maybe some kind of overlap with Luis as well. What do you see about the relationship between this museum and its community, the local residents? Do you see any kind of, well, I would say, any kind of activities from the side of the museum or any kind of responses from the community?
That is admittedly mostly outside of my knowledge, since I haven't lived on the island or spent extensive time there. But it's a very good point. I do think that could be one of the primary critiques of this project, is it arguably, while is using ecological aesthetics in, I think, a very effective way, it speaks quite powerfully to visitors, at least those who are looking hard. But beyond being an expression of the island's past, there isn't an explicit connection to the social history of the island. There, besides the path being connected to the town itself, there's not much expectation of involvement from the inhabitants of the island, apart from those working in the museum cafe. Does that answer your question?
Thank you.
Thank you, Han Mengfei, and thank you, Trent, for this paper. We'll continue with the roundtable. Actually, my timetable is somewhat arithmetically screwed up. We are not going to end so late. Nevertheless, we will move on, and we'll move on to the final paper of this session, which is given by Jaime Silva from the Center for Innovation in Territory, Urbanism and Architecture at the Instituto Superior Técnico at the University of Lisbon. Jaime Silva is an architect and is currently a PhD candidate at the University of Lisbon at the Institute of Instituto Superior Técnico, and he is concurrently studying at the EPFL Lausanne. He has worked with Eduardo Souto de Moura a few years ago, and has been awarded with the Alvaro Machado Award in 2021, and with Manuel Alves Campos won a special mention for innovative proposal at the Reuse Italy International Architecture Competition. His master's dissertation was on the analogical relation between the work of Lacaton Vassal and Andrea Palladio, entitled Rescuing the Machine à Habiter, the Palladian Villa in the Second Life of Lacaton Vassal's Transformed Grand Ensemble. His PhD research is entitled Dwelling Utopias, Modern Collective Houses from the Post-War in England, France, and Spain, and is funded by the Portuguese National Science Foundation. Jaime Silva, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Wilfred. Good afternoon. I would like to start by thanking the IKBC for this fantastic opportunity, as well as to Professor Robert MacArthur for his sagacious mentorship, and Ricardo Bofill, Taller de Arquitetura, in the persons of Natalia Schiner, and Ale Garzon for the valuable supply of information and material on Walden 7. My presentation is titled Housing the Gauche Divine, Tales of Franco Family and the Walden 7, and will focus on analyzing the design of the housing building Walden 7 as the vehicle for social criticism of the Spanish Francoist regime. Direct your eyesight inward and you'll find 1,000 regions in your mind, yet undiscovered. Travel them and be expert in home cosmography. Henry David Thoreau's words are a hymn to the discovering of the self. That it is no surprise that the building that borrows its name from him, the Walden 7 that we see here depicted, is grounded on the same idea.
Excuse me.
However, what is astonishing...
Excuse me, Jaime, excuse me.
Yes, yes.
Your image is not centered. I don't know what's happened. Maybe you have a larger image than the actual screen.
Sorry?
The image
is it not working well?
No, the image is too large for the screen.
Okay.
I think it's correctly on my screen.
Is it?
I believe
Yeah,
so.
mine also.
Is it working well? Yes.
Good here.
Okay.
It works on mine as well.
Also?
Okay, then it's something wrong with my screen. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, Wilfred. So, as I was saying, however, it is astonishing. What is astonishing in this building is the context from which it arises. Far from what could be assumed, it was built during the Francoist regime amidst a traditionalist context. It was a token of resistance against the dictatorship's values that dared against all odds to give form to a new and more varied society. Designed by a multidisciplinary team, it was set to promote the upheaval of the self, regardless of sex, orientation, or family composition, having the community as its supportive backdrop. What were then the contested values, and more importantly, how did architecture give shape to this fight? The word Francoism is normally used to describe both the fascist regime headed in Spain by Generalissimo Francisco Franco, El Caudillo, that we see here, and also the historical period in which he ruled from 1936 to 1975, starting with a partially failed military coup, followed by a bloody civil war that lasted for 4 long years. The Francoist regime was put into motion by the nationalists that had defeated the communists and republicans that were previously in power. In the opinion of several authors, although it is impossible to state that the regime had one cohesive and clear ideology, it can be identified nevertheless a set of ideological values that were constant throughout the regime. The ones that concern us, that are related to the conceptions of family and society, can be summarized in the following 3 ideas: the parts for the whole, the dream package, and the hierarchy of truth. The parts for the whole. One of the strongest values associated with Francoism was the understanding of the Spanish people as a unified body where the individual was seen as a tool for the collective. A vision that was not only applied to the relationship between citizens and the state, but also to all the natural entities of society. This is to say, the municipality, the syndicate, as we see here one example, and lastly, but not least, the family. Its members were not masters of their aspirations, but servants of a common will. The dream package. Although the Catholic Church did not play an active role in the military coup, it was nevertheless relieved by its later success. In truth, many of the Francoists were traditional Catholics and eager to reinstate the influence of religion on politics. Soon, once again, state and church were bound together by law. Public morality, social behavior, education, cultural expression, and family, of course, had now to be submitted to ecclesiastic authority. Within this scheme, that meant that the only accepted and aimed vision of family was the one put forward by the church, This is to say, the husband, the wife, and their children. The hierarchy of truth. As the victorious faction, the Francoists saw themselves as the good side that had defeated the evil of communism and republicanism. It was a messianic understanding that consequently meant that its ruler, El Caudillo, was the bearer of the uncontested truth that was passed down and managed by the head of each smaller group. The head of the family, this is of course the husband, the teacher, and the boss, were thus a modest emulation of Franco's possession aura. Sorry. This is to say that if one was not the husband, then one was denied any say on one's life as well as on the path to be taken as a group. Personal determination, with the search for tailored well-being in its physical, mental, and social realms, and especially with pleasure and creativity, was to be eliminated. By the 1960s and throughout the remaining years of Francoism, the contestation to the regime grew. Some of the members of the church started to openly criticize it. Students and workers manifested and striked for freedom and better conditions, and the leftists, liberals, grew stronger in the voicing of their opinion. Barcelona's Gauche Divine, which was a group of intellectuals that gathered in the nightclub Boccaccio, was among the last. The architect Ricardo Bofill, that we see here in the left, was one of the members of this Gauche Divine and a good example of its intellectual fight against oppression. Contradicting the regime's understanding of the authoritarian workplace, he created a multidisciplinary team to fight the traditional architectural approach, the so-called Ricardo Bofill Taller de Arquitetura, sometimes also identified in the spirit of its mission as the Taller de Arquitetura, or just the Taller. Although Bofill's first projects were mainly characterized by a modernist approach with some vernacular influences, by the mid-1960s already as a team, a more radical and utopic vision started to emerge. Project by project, as we see in these 6 cases, grew the interest to rethink the dwelling for a new and more progressive society, recurring to 3-dimensional geometrical rules. The Walden 7, built and designed between 1970 and 1975 on the outskirts of Barcelona, was not only the last of these experiments, but also the more mature. Let us focus on the building's design and its consequent relationship with the 3 Francoist ideas previously mentioned. The hierarchy of truth versus the equality of truth, the dream package versus the dreamt packages, and lastly, the parts for the whole versus the whole for the parts. The equality of truth. If Franco's regime supported itself on the idea that truth and determination were not an individual idiosyncrasy, the Taller will put the accents on the other way around, on self-will. Due to this understanding, Walden 7's first designs will be founded on the idea of the individual self, an aspiration that will be formally translated through the repetition of several cubic units, each one equivalent to the space for one person. Continuing the previous experiments, they will devise a geometric system for the oblique stacking of cubes, creating womb-like openings, almost like an ancient Mayan arc. The DRAM packages. Even though the initial conceptual base was the individual cell, that did not mean that the final project was not to envision the association with others. Later, the team planned multiple combinations between cells to establish a large variety of households. They did not only have in mind the traditional family, but also any other types of association, living alone, living with friends, or living with a partner, regardless of sex or orientation. In order to do so, the apartments were not thought of by traditional bourgeois configurations, but as the aggregation of several almost equal rooms for being. As we can see, for example, in these two-bedroom apartments, bedrooms were larger and also taken as places for individual leisure and work, almost as an independent cell, and living rooms congregated eating, working, and leisure in one space. Another feature of this design is that serving spaces, such as kitchens and bathrooms, were not considered as individual rooms, but as part of rooms for being. The all for the parts. By this moment, it is more than clear that for the Thaler, the individual was not a tool for the collective, but the other way around. Besides its innovative apartments, there was also a rich set of communitarian spaces designed to cater to the inhabitants' well-being. On the ground floor, there were several shops and multi-purpose spaces. Throughout each residential level, intricate galleries not only gave access to the apartments, as also brought the street spirit into the air. Lastly, on the rooftop, remembering Le Corbusier's Unité d'Habitation, there were 2 pools and several grass solariums. Here, the community could be in service of the self. Criticism B is rethinking the past. Characteristic of the Thaler's strong creativity, the Walden 7 is also a reflection on both the vernacular Catalan architecture and its consequent Catalan modernism. For one comes Walden 7's design of streets in the air. Going beyond the long and horizontal galleries of buildings such as the Robin Hood Gardens, the team will rehearse to go deeper in the emulation of the traditional Mediterranean street and its life. For this reason, its galleries are intentionally sinuous, full of dilatations and compressions, and open on the top. For another, the abundant use of tiles in multiple vibrant colors, as well as the expressive chimneys on the rooftop, distantly evoking Gaudi's designs, are a clear reinterpretation of the local tradition. Coincidence or not, the building was finished in the same year that the dictatorship ended and could immediately start to be freely used. However, one cannot help but wonder, what if the regime had not fallen that year? Even though Franco was no longer in good health, nobody could have predicted that he would die at that moment, or that the regime would immediately crumble after his death. In my opinion, here is where it lies the true audacity of the Thaler. In truth, if in the alternative scenario, the Walden 7 would most certainly have become, due to its DNA, a useful tool for contestation. Hopefully, not as a literal fighting barricade, as was the case of the Karl Marx Hof in Vienna, but as a monumental statement of what the future could be. The physical embodiment of a progressive and democratic society capable of reaching and contributing to the awareness of the remaining population. Today, when visiting Walden 7, it is impressive to see how much of its design solutions continue to be successful. Although many of the apartments have already been changed, the spaces for the community retain a cherished aura. There are ping pong tables in the multi-purpose spaces, the streets in the air are full of plants and small coffee tables, and the rooftop is pristine with its scintillant pools and green grass. It seems that the Thaler's vision for the future was not that far-fetched after all, and maybe still fit for many years to come. In the end, more than identifying the fascinating path that binds an idealized critic to a solid form, a wider reasoning, in my opinion, takes shape here. Architecture can not only be a system of internal critique on its past devices, but also a powerful tool of social intervention. And in the end, through program and design, criticism can give birth to the never before accomplished, but ever more desired house. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Jaime. And this is another excellent presentation with a detailed reading of both the overall form as well as the typologies of the units. I think that's been a very helpful view into the interior spaces and their layouts. We open the discussion now, or the discussion sessions, to questions and comments, please. Yes, Patricia, you have you have an applause. Sorry, that's not a comment you want to make. Thank you.
Thank you, Patricia.
Who would like to place a question or comment on the presentation? João.
Sorry, I don't see that. I don't know. I don't have the microphone. Do you know the 8 house by Big? And what do you think of the sloping streets that work much better than the horizontal ones of the Golden Lake by the Smithson? I don't know if you know this project, the 8 house by Big, Bjarke Ingels.
You're talking about Bjarke
I know it.
Copenhagen.
Yes, I think I know it, but very remotely. So I cannot give a comment on that one. I can only make maybe a deeper comparison in between the case of Walden 7 and the case of the Robin Hood Gardens, in the sense that I think that these long horizontal galleries do not create this sense of enclosure that it is needed to create spaces for states. The same thing as, for example, a public square, you need to have limits to feel the will to stay there, and in a certain sense to feel comfortable to create this kind of pause places. I think they were very intelligent in creating these dilatations and compressions, and to create these pockets that allow this definition of places of stay. The Big project, I know it's very, 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 very little, but I do believe that it goes in this same sense of trying to create a kind of different realities with different enclosures that do not give this monotonous and almost infinite views and relations with the gallery space.
Yes, in fact, it's only for the street. I refer only for the street. Do you speak about the street?
I'm speaking about the street because, you know, the Mediterranean street is not only a place to pass, to go through. So it's not only a transition space, but it is also a space of stay. So there are several things happening at the same time. And I think that was a bit their idea. The British also had this idea, for example, the case of the Killing Owls, as it tries also to explore this idea. There are countless many other projects done in Britain that try to explore it. But I think they didn't got it as right as here in the Walden 7 they got it, because they wanted to give and to bring to the building this the traditional street, and in the end they were not able to fully replicate the design characteristics that made them special, I think.
I think if I may just add another note on this. In Walden 7, the walkways, the corridors face each other and are overlooking each other. So there's an idea of there's a communal spirit in that. And in Robin Hood Gardens, they're one-sided. They look out onto the city. So they're isolating. And I think that the kind of syntactic aspect of this must and cannot be overlooked. So while they are maybe in section typologically identical, in terms of how they work, they're completely different. João Navarrete, you had a question or a comment?
Yes. First of all, very beautiful presentation, Jaime. I really enjoyed it, and I wish that I just wish the presentation there was also more deep analysis on textures and colors, because I think it's something that is very strong on Bofill's design. And I saw through the images very interesting, a very interesting palette. I think all his projects have very interesting palettes. I'd like to understand that better. And also something that made me really curious is that I haven't seen actually many images of interiors from Bofill's residential buildings. And something that I found quite interesting is those almost those mattresses, like they are very low, almost like a Japanese sitting style. And I didn't know the apartments came with this. So this is my question: is this they were delivered with this furniture, with like this futons on the ground? Because that's something very interesting.
So thank you very much, John, for your very interesting question, especially the last one. For the first one, actually, since the presentation, or my essay is more to the relationship between the use of the building as a way to fight against the values of the Franquist regime. It was more to try to identify which were the design characteristics that expressed this fighting ideology, let's say. But it's also very interesting. There is an entire story behind the question of colors and tiles also, which you very well mentioned, because everything is very carefully selected, since the color of the outside, which is this, let's say, this orange like terracotta color, which gives this color of monumentality and this imposition on the landscape, almost like this block of earth that has always been there. But then in the interiors, they intelligently choose to use a strong palette of more fresh colors, and all of this is done intentionally. So it's amazing when you visit the building and understand the richness that is behind it. As for the second part, I do think that the design of the apartments might be the less accomplished solution of the building, because this makes part of a kind of a set of experiments that they were doing on housing. And in this particular building, they were trying, I'm not going to say to impose, but at least to propose a way of being in the house. And so even though the houses are very adaptable to different types of families, they force you to have a very specific set of functions there. So as you can see, if the mattress is in that place, so that is the place for sitting. If the table is in the other place, that's the place for working. So there's a kind of a fixedness of things inside the house. The truth about this is that this photo that I present is like from the two apartments that were done with the solution that they were envisioned, because in reality, these apartments were bought and the majority of people did not want this solution. So basically, the confirmation of the spaces is the same, but this thing of the levels and of the mattresses was not well received. And we can see that also by the fact that the interior of the apartments have been very changed throughout time, and the collective spaces have remained almost the same as they were.
So I think that's a very important point, and that is worth elaborating in your essay for the publication, because I think the projection that is being suggested by the plans and the photographs is that what was then current, there was in 1972 there was an exhibition at the Museum of Modern Art on the new Italian new domestic landscape in Italy, and where a lot of these influences from Japan were translated into this kind of a new social domestic environment, and with these mattresses, with a landscape of low lying resting and sitting surfaces. And I think that the utopia that was projected in that, I think the fact that it hasn't lasted may not be the fault of the architects, but at least I think the reality is worth talking about. Anna Tostoy.
Thank you. I don't know if I'm allowed to discuss, because
No.
supervising the thesis of Jaime, but I think it's always time to share what the ideas that came up with the presentations, and it was very good. Congratulations. I think that perhaps this could turn for the big round table. I think this is a question, the house and the housing, and at which point we are now in the 20s of the 21st century in this matter. And Wilfried, you were talking about utopia on this Walden project, and I think is evident. And I wonder what happened to Bofill after this fantastic, innovative wave creation. Then the following decades, he was making quite conventional things. And finally, perhaps the question is it necessary to have a kind of a political struggle? And I'm focusing Catalonia and Barcelona, and I'm thinking about the Casa Bloc in the end of the 20s and 30s. And it's very fun because I never realized that the streets in the air, the galleries, are not so Corbusian. They have links to these things, and I never made this relation since now. So the people can see each other in the galleries, and this is very southern living life. But I think the point is, why these quite, let's say, successful experiments, they stay as experiments, and they don't become perhaps they are not able to become a rule. But in a way, why don't we have more cases with such a, I would say, a deep energy of all the taller, all the intervenients in the project, architects, engineers, sociologists, and so on? Why these cases are always a kind of divine? It's something that came up to my mind. Why afterwards Bofill turns in a quite classical bourgeois way, and even in the color, even in the materials, not just the organization, but all the concept. I don't know if it is a question, but perhaps we may discuss this later on, Jaime.
May I just say something? Not an answer to what. Could I? Because there is a hand up and there.
Yes, please. No, you go ahead and then João.
It's not an answer, but it's instigated by Anna's question. I think there is a surge, things converging at certain periods in time. And as you, Wilfried, mentioned regarding the interiors, the new domestic landscape exhibition, at the same time or a little before Walden 7, we have Moshe Safdie in Montreal with Habitat. So I think these kind of utopian or experimental aspects of living within a house or a housing scheme or within the city, they seem to converge at certain times if we look back at the history of architecture, and then they dilute. If they become part of the culture of a city, as Anna asked, I cannot answer now, but I'm just thinking that that was a period of fermentation where these things came together in different places of the world.
Yeah, I think it's an important issue. We will take this further, and also I think we should probably also discuss how the notion of Walden, which is of course a kind of an isolation notion, right? You isolate yourself from, you place yourself at a remote distance to the rest of society. That's what that book represents by Thoreau. Is completely the opposite. It's a commune, where an individual has a space, but it's nevertheless a collective. João.
Yes, I just want to actually agree on what Anna Tolstoy said. I remember that I visited Bofill's works in Paris, and I was able to visit a couple of buildings of him in Spain. I had exactly the same feeling as she said. I got a little bit disappointed And the buildings in Spain that I saw, I don't know exactly the year of them, but they were very much way more experimental in terms of intimacy and interior spaces. And it's quite disappointing that when you go to those very huge projects in Paris, it's almost like everything goes way more traditional, and he surrenders himself to just make gestural things on some specific moments to make like sometimes a very kitsch exposure of monumentality. And it seems like he completely detaches himself from the complexity of drawing intimacy interior space. So yeah, this is very interesting. And unfortunately, I think that's something that can be seen in many architects in their late stages of their careers, when they have to do very, very big, very big things.
So did you visit the Les Espaces d'Abraxas?
Yes.
Because Les Espaces d'Abraxas is the setting for the movie, the dystopian movie Brazil of I don't know, I think it's in the 80s, where it's a kind of a consumerist terror state, and it's completely the opposite to the utopia of Walden 7. So, you know,
Exactly.
I think what Anna has pointed out is actually highlighted by the art form of the movie as this kind of a complete disaster. Anyway, I think we should bring in the other topics. The first one on the transformation of a shopping center, a consumerist space that failed and that was transformed into a leisure facility, followed by the critique of one Turkish and one Austrian-Swiss architect of how modernization might or might not take place in domestic environment, and how there was a failed attempt to raise the flag for modernization, for modernism in Japan in the competition for the museum in Tokyo, to paper that showed how there was a critique of modernization, and how the work of arts by the content that was exhibited or is exhibited plus the architecture go hand in hand to underwrite this fundamentalist critique of modernization, and finally to the explicit critique of the Francoist ideal of a family. So I think we've had 5 very good and precise expositions of this topic of architecture's build criticism, all in their different ways. And I invite now comments or questions to bring these 2 topics together, or to highlight one or the other issue that hasn't been discussed before. Who would like to enter?
May I just say something that might
Ilias, yeah.
help the conversation? And it's to do with having read very carefully Trent's paper on the Inujimase Essential Art Museum. What I found interesting there, and I do not know if it holds true in the other cases that have been presented today, is that we saw, I think, we read about an extremely interesting example of build criticism of a very complex building on many different levels. It's not just the aspect, the ecological aspect and the poetic aspect that Trent brings together, but he discusses the building construction, its environmental performance. There is a weaving of different narratives of a story, Icarus, and of an artist, Yanagi, Mishima and Icarus, and also the spatial organization and the artist's works, how intricately they're woven together. So as an example of build criticism that addresses modernity in a different way, contradicts it or whatever, we see that for that to work, and I think it works in Inujimase Rensho, you have many different levels of complexity from which it comprises. And that makes it very interesting. It seems like the architects have thought about every step, art and architecture and the narrative and ecology and the water and the heating and the sun and everything, which we do not often find even in the examples we discussed today. I mean, I think the presentation also and the example of Walden is very, very illuminating, but I do not think it works on so many levels. So to address architecture as built criticism, I think the more complex layers you have of reading it, I think the more interesting it becomes, the less one-dimensional, the less to do with modernity, let's say.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting point. Other comments? João.
Yes, this is something what Elias said, I totally agree with. And I think actually something that is quite important nowadays in which I see there's a lot of many presentations here today, I think are doing that, which is almost like updating the historiography, because the mainstream architecture, modern architectural historiography we have nowadays that gives a lot of emphasis to the role of Le Corbusier and these European modernist architects from the 1920s and 1930s. They actually had this success, and they're so much talked about because their position regarding the modern movement and architecture in general was very pamphletary. So they sometimes, like when I've read Le Corbusier's books, I always had this impression how simplistic they are in some sense, and we gave a really central role to these ideas and this way of conceiving ideas. And what we can see if we have a broader and more detailed view of the production, even within this period, we can see that there's just so many architects which have this not one-dimension view of things and have a way more complex approach regarding the built environment and accept all the necessities of modern life and everything, but they're way more sensible to contextual sensibilities. And I don't know, I think now in contemporarity, we are starting to look things differently and giving value to this kind of approach and this kind of view. And I think this is extremely necessary.
Well, I think that it's an important issue you're bringing up. I mean, what are the attitudes that dominate at any time in the field of arts or in the field of architecture? And one could say, or one could ask, was it necessary to modernize things? This is a kind of general and provocative question. And you could say, well, in the 20s, there was a need for it. Well, I'm in Shanghai at the moment, and if you look at the city of Shanghai, and if I tell you of my travels in the areas around Shanghai to Hangzhou and Suzhou and other places, you travel on a high-speed train at 250 kilometers an hour, 340 kilometers an hour. You see high-rises, 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 modern factories, modern villages, modern viaducts, modern viaducts for motorways. And of course, there's some agriculture. The dominant image of China at the moment, to me, is that modernization has covered at least 50%, if not 60% of, or replaced 50% or 60% of what was built previously. And what remains is a very small element of rural China. So it's not surprising that in China, there is an interesting move for the last 20 years or so, trying to revive certain Chinese traditions from ancient compositional strategies that were developed for landscape gardens and so on. So is architecture, or are pioneers of architecture of avant-gardists or rearguardists in architecture trying to balance development? And that's where, for example, the case study that Büsra Korulu presented of Egli and Hakim
Sedat Hakkı Eldem.
Then,
Eldem presented is very interesting because it shows these different approaches. And, you know, if these two had lived long enough, maybe they could have reached a kind of a meeting point at some stage. Is contemporaneity about contrariness, opposition? Is it about balancing things? Is it about achieving a kind of a both and solution that harks back to the roots as well as looking forward to the future? So where are we, and where have these individuals been that we've listened to the different 5 cases? Question for public discussion. Şengül, you wanted to say something. I saw you. You wanted to say something. And especially on this, Hakim Selim, you should maybe comment on Büsra's paper.
Dear Wilfred, today I made a mistake of timing. It said 20, and that makes 5 o'clock in Turkey. But when I joined you, I was too late. I didn't know. I don't know why this happened. This is happening for the first time. I'm so sorry. But yeah, I couldn't listen to Büsra, and it would have been really nice. However, I was able to listen to the last presentation, and I think Elias' criticism was good in general, but we never ask the contributors to be specific about something, so I think they can make their own choices as to what to underline. And this Walden was also, since I'm interested in housing, it was a shock for me to see it on Yapı Journal's front page. And since then, I really love it because I love communal life, friendship. I'm not a good neighbor, actually, but to observe that it it gives permission to this humane desires and interactions, and I love it. As to the designer's way of advancement, I think I'm also shocked about it, but I'm thinking about the reason, not only the early works, the Marna Valley kind of thing, the castle. It is, as you all probably know, it is a criticism of Corbu's palace idea. The whole population can have a palace kind of thing, but I think the details were very brutal, and I've seen it from rather far, but I remember I did not like it. However, I have a very short passage in my book about Ricardo Bofill, where I also included his urban designs. They are really shockingly old. And I was trying to discover an answer for that. But the only answer I could detect from his own words on his own life story was that when he visited Algiers, he was very impressed. But which Algiers? I mean, probably the existing old, but it is also a very humane setting. I don't think the things he designed for Africa, for Asia, even for China, do not contain any impression of Algiers. And why do architects do this? I think there is also a matter of commission. So that is the sole answer I could devise for this situation. I mean, but anyone could be hired for such a job. Why Bofill very determinedly redesign this Gothic spaces and Renaissance designs for urban areas? I have no idea. Can you comment as to why?
Let's hear Jaime Silva. Jaime.
Yes. I just wanted to add here, this is a wonderful observation in continuation. I wanted to add two pieces of information which I find important. One of them is the fact that in 1975, not only did the regime end it, as also the core team of the Thaler, a lot of people left. So I do think that those projects are the result of a creative team and of several people working together. And so I consider that in some way there are not only his authorship, but the authorship of a collective and of a group of people, as for example his sister and Bofill. And when they left, there is a part of that knowledge and of those intentions that also left. Then there is this shift that he explains. I do not know very much why, but he decided to turn himself to historicism. I think he got a certain disbelief on these visions. Also because, and this is the second piece of information, the Walden 7 was partially promoted by him. So it's this idea of the architect believed so much in the idea that he bought the terrain, he found the investors and invest in the solution. And I think that in the end, he might have been a bit disappointed because maybe did not have the reception that he wanted. And when the team started to crumble down, maybe he decided to shift to another viewpoint, I think. But these are my interpretations of the situation.
Well,
I also wanted to add some. Yes.
Well, I was just going to
add some.
that you did not shy away from being explicit about the figurative aspect of Walden 7 when you said it's a womb-like structure. And it's exactly
they were not also.
Yeah, and it's exactly Bofill's forte, if you like, that he's never shied away from engaging in these highly explicit, figurative gestures, whether modernist or sculptural or postmodernist. And you remember 1975, 1976 was it was the kind of the dam had burst, the postmodernists had entered the valley, and that was it. And so and the famous internationally the reception of Rossi and Venturi had already been widespread, had widespread influence, and therefore he jumped onto that bandwagon at an early stage. But you were going to say something else.
I wanted to add something because you did this very interesting comment on how do we act as architects in the contemporaneity. And it's interesting that you go to the beginning of the postmodernism, because I am of the opinion that since the 1980s with the Venice Biennale of Portuguese, I think that we entered in a new way of doing architecture, where we are not seeing kind of a movement or a collective search for the same thing, but what we started to have is this different attitudes that all coexist at the same time. And I believe that in the contemporary we have happening at the same time, the ecologists, the new technologists, the traditionalists, and it's very interesting that everyone is coexisting, and maybe it's that you are very interestingly saying, which is both. So everything, it's kind of balancing the universe, and it's not possible to see it as we saw it in the modern movement, when there was this.
Well, you're absolutely right with that observation, but I think what is important about this conference and your contributions and the contributions of last weekend is that we've been looking at individual buildings, and we've been studying them as substantive statements that have this differentiated spectrum of expression that is not just reducible to image, which is something that we've been accustomed to over the last 30 years, this development of architecture's image and the kind of reduction to styles. The purpose of criticism is to look beyond style and to excavate all these different layers, which is what has been done, and therefore to gain a more fundamental understanding of what architecture is capable of doing and what criticism is capable of doing. So I think that while it's always interesting to talk about these kind of these exhibitions and blah 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 blah, if architecture is going to have a relevance in the construction of our environments in the future, if architects are going to be given from architectural criticism any kind of feedback as to how they're doing, then we must work harder at these at excavating these different layers. And I'm very grateful to all of you who've contributed so far for doing that. So, but that's not a final comment. That's just kind of an interim statement. Ilias.
Yes, I'm thinking that regarding the question that you put about modernity, the need for modernity, I think in today's presentation, it becomes clear when the context is, the political and social context is much more clearly demarcated. And in this sense, I think Turkey and Spain, Busra's paper and Zaim's paper are different from the others, because in the case of Walden, we said that's what Zaim supported, that it appears as a reaction to the whole idea of the Franquist family, etc., etc. And in the case of Busra's paper, the Austrian architect Egli, who is imported, quote unquote, to Turkey, is clearly an action, a wish for the advancement of the social, cultural, political agenda of Atatürk to modernize Turkey. So these are also quite particular political situations, Turkey in the 20s, 30s, and post-Franquist Spain. And so these two examples, I think, bring to the fore the role of architecture much more potently than maybe others were like, what do we do today? What is the extreme political situation we can answer to in a globalized but with very local strifes, as we can see, situation.
Louise.
I think that on this idea of political, we should add Menfei Pan presentation, because even though it was never built, it was also at a question or not being happy with what was happening, not only with architecture at the time, but also with the enormous power that the emperors had at the time. So I think it's also political. The statement of Maekawa is not only a statement of modernity just coming from Corbu's 2 years of stage. It's also a statement of not being into that very profound government, you might call divine government of an emperor.
Well, I think, I mean, just to continue from that, I mean, the current Chinese condition is that we have, or that the Chinese government during the the pandemic has constructed 4 national cultural institutions address different issues, whether it's literature, painting, or whatever. 3 of them are in the kind of reproduction Chinese temple style. As far as I know, I haven't seen them yet, but that's what I was told. And one of them is by Wang Shu, and it's completely, well, not completely, it's in the main, a modern building with 2 wooden pavilions in the manner of, or in the tradition of Chinese temples. And that alone, I think, is interesting because it shows that the Chinese government within its own country is leading a debate about what is appropriate and what is not appropriate, what should represent the nation and what should not represent the nation. And there's a kind of a very strong support for this kind of re-evaluation of what tradition translated into a modern language can mean for contemporary architecture. And so, you know, we're sort of, I think Elias has pointed out a very interesting seeming contradiction that, you know, Ataturk was for modernism. Chinese government has been for modernism all the time, and they've imported so many modern architects. If you look at the cities, colleagues were here. Yasmin Sharif was here, and she said, looking around, I don't know where I am. I would think if I were just dropped like free on the globe, I would have thought I'm somewhere in the United States. And so, you know, the pendulum of who thinks what is appropriate can swing from one to the other, and it seems that only very few people can penetrate or actually communicate what is substantively qualitative or high quality, whereas others seem to be more conventional and therefore get past. Louise.
Yes, only very quick, going back to what I said before, but what you just said now, it's very interesting. But also Trenton presentation also touches on policy, on politics, on how this museum questions what happens there before at a certain specific time, and bringing Mishima, it's also has to do with that. So I think this question of our architectural building criticism brings in also, and we're seeing it, and it's happening today, brings in politics.
Thank you. Trent.
Yeah, I just wanted to, again, in response to your question, Wilfred, as to how we approach things. Is it the avant-garde? Is it the rear guard? Is it the both and? I would agree with, I believe, what others are saying, that I think it's time for a much more thorough critical investigation of the both and. We can see that, for example, in where the success lies in those endeavors is in addressing multivalence successfully. And Elias, I thank you so much for your comment about the museum. I think you got to the core of it better than I did. That multivalence, this working on multiple layers at once is the key to something being integral, not being pastiche or kind of empty homage. Wang Shu's work as well, it's dealing with traditional cultural icons, but reevaluating them on multiple levels. It's the key, I think, is that he is interrogating the craft of construction in everything he does, and those traditional temples have been recreated in a new way based upon reevaluation of the craft of their construction. I think the Inojima Saidanjo Museum works because it is integrating everything it does, both with the craft of construction and integrating environmental functions, one might say, with cultural. It's taking sustainability as a cultural issue, which it is, one that has so many different arms that you can't address one without addressing the other. Though many, reductionist narratives, the early narratives of Le Corbusier would hope to do so, but you lose something integral when you, whether for the purposes of selling something more easily to a client or succeeding in a competition, lose the complexity of that multivalence and addressing every issue in that web of connections.
Yes, we are approaching the top of the hour, and I would like to give the previous speakers, Pan Mengfei, Patricia Mello, and Bushra Korulu. I hope I'm pronouncing this name correctly. No, Korulu.
It's all right.
Please pronounce it for us so that we can get it right at least once.
No,
You'd like to
there's
say
no problem.
Please, Bushra or Bushra.
It would be nice if my name is pronounced right. The surname is okay, but Bushra.
Bushra.
Yeah.
Korulu.
Kurulu, yeah.
Geraldo.
Okay.
Kurulu.
Yeah, would you like to have a final word for this session?
I mean, it's quite interesting how everyone approached their topic, and also like I was also questioning these two people while presenting it to you, because there are names that are very unknown actually, because we only talk about also at the university here about all the modern architects from Germany and Switzerland, and I was kind of done with that, and that's why I shifted to those unknown names. And while writing the paper, I was also very suffering from, like, I wanted to detach myself from the architects and only focus on the building and how it actually expresses itself without the architect. And then you realize that, as I also mentioned, it's not only the architect who actually shapes the building, it's also the people living in it. It's also the society who looks at it. There are so many factors when a building is actually being built. So from my side, I need to focus on that in my paper in a better way, I think, to make the view from without the name of the architects actually.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, but don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, because the biographies of these people play a role, and they explain something, right? I mean, the fact that he's from Vienna, Egli is from Vienna, and you made those parallels with laws, I think is very important. So
yeah, of course, but also these architects were, I mean, also the Turkish architects spend all of his time almost studying abroad, so of course you get influenced and by certain things. And this was this is I don't know, like maybe I don't know, I never knew about China, but I think this is a problem, the importation of ideas, how actually you destruct the whole structure. And today in the contemporary architecture, there's no linearity also in Turkey. So it's like the identity is completely lost and you're trying to imitate others, but actually it's not original enough. And having looked at the history, there are so many gaps that happened and then had bad influence on the future. And I don't know how to correct this mistake that happened in the past and how to not influence the future. Yeah.
That's a good topic for a future conference.
Yeah.
It really is. Yeah.
Thank you. Pan Mengfei, your final words, please.
Words, okay. Yeah, Bouchard brought up about, well, very nicely. And I think I can't wait actually to read everyone's papers. And for my own, I think people had already mentioned that the star is not linear and there's always very many layers. And I had to cut off a lot of branches to make my today's presentation simple and the paper to get to the point. Actually, Maegawa later on did design Japanese style the buildings for a Bangkok project, which makes it very complicated. People say he shifted, and I couldn't actually mention the much more political climate of the 1920s and 30s. It was a time of the empire and the colonial period expansion of its land to China, Korea, Taiwan, Southeast Asia. So it was also a time to relate Japanese style to the Oriental, the East Asia, and also to make it a new form. Internationalism was kind of lucky at the time to meet the new needs. So it's also worth mention the Chinese, what is currently happening in Shanghai in China. And I find a lot of echoes. That was 100 years ago in Japan, but it's now currently happening in China. I find a little bit, well, for me, maybe it's just interdisciplinary, or it's a kind of barrier between disciplines, because I came from a sociological background. My approach was not really about the visual analysis or architectural analysis or from the visual form, but more from a perspective of its relationship with the society. And maybe later on we could develop a bit more arguments into that, like interdisciplinary dialogues. Thank you. And thank you so much for staying here. It's already October the 22nd here.
Well, it's 11 o'clock now in Shanghai.
Yes.
Patricia, your final thoughts, please.
For me, I think all the papers are very interesting. I'm very happy to listen to the contents. A good opportunity, and also to know you all. For me, by my point of view, the only important thing is that the project has an effect on the society. So it's not important the style. I think that the only this is important in general in all over the world.
I think that's a good final word. And I don't want to have the final word. I invite whoever would like to say final words, please, to do so. And thereafter we will just invite everybody to the final session tomorrow, which begins at 8 p.m. Shanghai time. I would like to thank all the contributors from the official side. Wonderful.
May I add something, Wilfred?
Yes, Schenkel, you have a final word.
Yeah, well, I don't know whether it's final or not,
word, no?
But I've been treating architecture from the viewpoint of spatial organization. Now, at our first meeting, I thought there was too much history. Now I think there is too much formalism, formats. We are not dealing with arts, you know. Even I contributed to this session with my very formal criticism, but actually, when I write about criticism, which you know, I treat it as a spatial organization. I use these terms because then it doesn't matter whether you are producing something in a factory or redesigning or renovating a building. My terminology encompasses all. Now, at this session, I enjoyed hearing everything. So I think I'm very happy to be with you, as always. But in order to make a big turn, we shouldn't be considering architecture as a form or format or type or typology. Of course, in Jamie's, I like the types of the houses very much and their combination very much. I always love that building. It makes a big difference in human beings' life. Nevertheless, again, as Elias contributed, I think anything architecture must be considered at various levels. The materials it uses and the technology it adopts, because I think like Frampton, I love reading Frampton since my childhood. I think it comprehends the cosmogony, starting from the cosmogony. So there are so many rich levels of criticizing architecture. And I think it is nice to hear everyone who contributed here that they all chose their own levels. We should try to look at it holistically. We are organizing the space. Whatever.
Thank you, Tengu, for those words. And once again, thank you to all the contributors for today. We'll be back at 8 p.m. Shanghai time tomorrow. So I invite you to the final session. That all should also prove to be a very interesting series of papers. So good night, good morning, good afternoon to everyone around the globe.
Good rest to all in China.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye, Ruth. See you tomorrow, Ruth.
Bye. See you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.